In the sweltering summer of 1876, 41 tobacco workers vanished overnight from the Beaumont plantation in central Kentucky. There were no bodies, no ransom notes, and the sheriff's investigation was abruptly shut down after only 3 days by order of the county magistrate. For nearly a century and a half, the families of Bourbon County have whispered about that suffocating July night, when an entire crew disappeared without a trace from one of Kentucky's most prosperous estates. Official records claim the workers broke their contracts and fled north. But recently unearthed letters hidden for generations within the walls of Beaumont Manor tell a much darker story. These letters paint a picture that challenges everything historians thought they knew about post-Civil War Kentucky. Beaumont Plantation, nearly 3,000 acres of fertile bluegrass soil, had been founded in 1798 by French immigrant Claude Beaumont and survived the Revolution, the War of 1812, and the turmoil of Reconstruction. By 1876, Claude's grandson Jeremiah was running the estate. Unlike many planters ruined by emancipation, Jeremiah adopted a contract labor system, paying fair wages and offering housing to former slaves and poor white families. That summer, the plantation was thriving. The tobacco crop was the finest in years, and Jeremiah employed a diverse group of 41 workers, freedmen, who chose to stay on the land Irish immigrants, escaping poverty and struggling local families. Among them were Samuel Rutledge, a trusted former slave turned field supervisor; Patrick O'Sullivan, whose letters to his sister in Boston spoke of hope; Martha Caldwell, a widowed mother of 3; and Thomas Vance, a young man seeking a future beyond the hard mountain farms of eastern Kentucky. Beaumont was more than a workplace. It functioned like a small community with rows of cabins, a general store, a schoolhouse, and a chapel. To outsiders, it seemed like a model of progress and integration. But under the surface, resentment brewed. The year 1876 was the nation's centennial, a moment of celebration overshadowed by the violent realities of Reconstruction. In Kentucky, the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups were active, and Beaumont's integrated workforce stood out as a challenge to the old order. Local newspapers condemned Jeremiah's social experiment, and neighboring landowners, jealous and embittered, spread rumors and threats. On the morning of July 23, 1876, the day began like any other. Before dawn, workers gathered their tools and fanned out into the fields as the humid air carried the scent of ripening tobacco. Birds called from the oak trees as Samuel assigned crews, 28 to the fields and 13 to the curing barns. By 7 a.m., everyone was in place. Jeremiah rode out on his bay mare, pleased with the crop and promising that the season would bring prosperity for every family. By noon, with the sun beating down and the temperatures soaring past 90 degrees, the bell called the crew in for their midday meal. They sat in the shade of the great oaks, eating cornbread and beans, drinking cold buttermilk, laughing at Martha Caldwell's jokes, and listening to Patrick O'Sullivan's Irish ballads, unaware that this ordinary meal would be the last time anyone ever saw them. As the workers rested beneath the oaks that July afternoon, several mentioned seeing unfamiliar riders earlier that week. Well-dressed men in dark suits who had passed silently along the plantation road without stopping. Samuel Rutledge assumed they were buyers scouting crops, but their cold demeanor unsettled him. After lunch, the crews returned to their tasks, tending the most delicate leaves until the heat faded and the sun sank low. When the bell rang at dusk, the 41 workers gathered at the general store as usual to receive their daily wages. Jeremiah Beaumont's practice of paying nightly having earned him loyalty and trust. Thomas Vance recorded that every single worker was paid by 6:30. Then they returned to their cabins cooking supper, sitting on porches, talking quietly as the night settled in. Sometime between that peaceful evening and the next dawn, everything changed. When Jeremiah rang the bell at 5:30 the next morning, the cabin stood silent and empty. Doors hung open. Half-finished meals sat on tables, children's toys and clothing lay scattered, and letters waited unsent. Yet not a single person remained. The mass disappearance stunned Bourbon County. Jeremiah rode straight to Paris to report to Sheriff William Danvers, who at first dismissed the event as a mass walkout. But Beaumont insisted this was no desertion. The harvest was only half done, valuable wages were still due, and all their belongings, savings letters, even Sunday clothes had been left behind. Reluctantly, the sheriff organized a search that lasted 3 days. They found only strange signs, horse tracks leading in and out of the plantation partially concealed. Cabins where belongings had been overturned in panic, while others looked undisturbed. And in the fields, 3 acres of the finest tobacco cut down and burned in neat piles as though by deliberate sabotage. On the 4th day, County Magistrate Edmund Hartwell abruptly arrived with orders to shut the investigation down. He declared the workers had fled north and claimed sealed legal documents proved they were involved in unspecified crimes. Despite Danvers' protests, the case was closed by his authority. Furious Jeremiah hired private detectives and even brought in the Pinkertons, but neither found a trace of the missing 41. As months passed, the cabins rotted empty. The once thriving plantation fell into ruin, and whispers spread through Bourbon County. Some said the clan had wiped them out for daring to work together as equals. Others believed they had been kidnapped and sold into forced labor, while a few whispered of powerful men silencing witnesses. The mystery deepened 3 years later, when a drifter claimed he had seen Martha Caldwell alive in a Memphis boarding house, describing her distinctive scar in detail. The local authorities confirmed a woman matching her had stayed there for 3 days, paid in gold, and vanished again without leaving her name. The boarding house keeper later recalled that the woman believed to be Martha Caldwell asked repeatedly about safe routes to Mexico, before vanishing one morning without a word, leaving behind the only possible clue to the fate of the 41 missing workers. Over the years, as no other trace surfaced, the disappearance at Beaumont Plantation became a ghost story, whispered in kitchens and country stores across central Kentucky. The truth might have remained hidden forever if not for Margaret Beaumont, Jeremiah's great niece, who inherited the decaying mansion in 1923. A Louisville school teacher with a passion for family history, Margaret began restoring the old house and soon stumbled on a secret that rewrote everything. While stripping damaged wallpaper in Jeremiah's study, she uncovered a cache of letters he had hidden before his death in 1881, revealing that months before the disappearance, he had been receiving escalating threats from a group calling itself the Kentucky Brotherhood, a secret alliance of landowners, politicians, and businessmen determined to crush integrated workforces like Beaumont. One letter warned that the mixing of races was an abomination, and that he would face consequences if he did not disband his workforce. And another explicitly demanded that he dissolve his operation or suffer retaliation. Jeremiah had appealed to the governor and even to federal authorities, but his pleas for protection went unanswered. A final letter to his brother, written just 2 days before the mass vanishing, expressed his fear that he had made a terrible mistake, admitting he could no longer protect his workers, and warning that if anything happened, the answers would lie with the men who met secretly in the basement of Hartwell House, a clear reference to County Magistrate Edmund Hartwell, who later shut down the official investigation. Spurred by this, Margaret dug into dusty county archives and discovered a disturbing pattern. In the months after Beaumont's tragedy, other integrated farms and mills in central Kentucky were attacked, burned, or forced to close, with investigations repeatedly halted by magistrates. She also found that several men connected to these events, especially Hartwell, had somehow grown far richer during the late 1870s. Despite the crushing post-war economy, with Hartwell alone acquiring 10,000 new acres between 1877 and 1880. Her most shocking discovery came when she pried up the floorboards of Jeremiah's bedroom and unearthed a coded ledger that, once painstakingly deciphered, laid bare the Kentucky Brotherhood as not just a hate group, but a vast criminal enterprise. Through intimidation and murder, they eliminated rivals and seized property targeting integrated farms like Beaumont, not only out of racism, but because such operations threatened their grip on cheap exploited labor. Margaret's investigation soon drew dangerous attention. By late 1924, she began receiving anonymous threats. Her apartment was broken into, and letters from collaborators stopped reaching her. When she hired Robert Hayes, a former Louisville police detective, to help her track the descendants of the missing workers, he made progress before dying suddenly of a supposed heart attack. His files vanished, and witnesses reported two well-dressed men visiting him the day before. Shaken but resolute, Margaret pressed on, convinced more than ever that the 41 had not walked away, but had been slaughtered, their fate buried under the influence and wealth of the men who had orchestrated one of Kentucky's darkest crimes. Here's a rewritten version of your text as one seamless, engaging paragraph, with no line breaks or special characters, while keeping the key events clear and tense. Margaret Beaumont's most important discovery came when she found Ezra O'Sullivan, the aging nephew of Patrick O'Sullivan, one of the vanished workers. Living in Boston, Ezra had preserved his uncle's letters and spent decades searching for answers, and he showed her Patrick's last letter dated July 20th, 1876, warning his sister Mary that men had been watching the plantation from the tree line at night, that Jeremiah Beaumont was uncharacteristically tense, and that while some workers were tempted to leave, most stayed to finish the harvest because the wages would carry their families through the winter. Though he feared something terrible was about to happen, and pleaded that if he disappeared, Mary must tell the authorities he had not left by choice. Ezra then revealed that in 1891, a stranger came to him, claiming to have been present the night the workers were slaughtered, saying their bodies had been hidden so well they would never be found, and that Patrick died bravely trying to protect women and children. Before vanishing again, the man gave Ezra a clue to find where they rest. Search where the tobacco grows tallest in the richest soil, where the limestone runs deepest. Realizing this, described the most fertile section of the eastern fields, where the crops had always thrived, and where acres had been destroyed after the disappearance. Margaret brought in soil experts who confirmed that the ground there contained unusually high levels of phosphorus and nitrogen, consistent with something buried deep below. Just as she prepared to dig, County Magistrate Harrison Hartwell, son of the man who shut down the investigation in 1876, appeared with attorneys and a court order halting all excavation in the name of preservation and property rights. Margaret knew she was close, and as she was forced to stop, the final piece of the puzzle came from Elias Rutledge, grandson of Samuel Rutledge, the missing field supervisor. In a snowbound December evening in 1924, in a small Paris, Kentucky hotel room, the 73-year-old man finally broke a promise he had sworn on a Bible decades earlier. His hands shaking, he told Margaret that his grandmother Rebecca had been away in Lexington caring for a dying sister on the night of July 23, 1876, and thus survived what everyone else did not. Return Returning at dawn on July 24th, she walked into an eerie silence. Cabins stood open and empty, children's toys lay abandoned in the dirt, meals were half prepared as if time had stopped and fires had gone cold. Rebecca's instincts, honed through a life of slavery and war, told her to hide, and what she witnessed that morning would reveal that the Beaumont tragedy was not a mystery at all, but a massacre planned by powerful men who intended that no one ever speak of what really happened. Here's a tightened atmospheric rewrite of your latest passage, maintaining a single continuous flow with no line breaks or special characters while emphasizing the tension and horror. Instead of calling out for her husband or approaching the main house, Rebecca hid deep in the woods, bordering the eastern fields, her instincts telling her to stay unseen. What she witnessed over the next few hours scarred her for life. As the sun climbed and the Kentucky heat thickened, she saw a line of wagons emerge from the fields. Not tobacco wagons, but heavy freight carts with reinforced beds and canvas covers. Unknown drivers guided them, but riding alongside were men she recognized all too well. At the front was County Magistrate Edmund Hartwell, his fine clothes smeared with dirt and something darker. Behind him rode Judge Cornelius Vandenberg of the County Court Mayor, Samuel Preston of Paris, and Dr. Hiram Caldwell, a man she had always believed decent. The sight of these respected leaders in such a grim procession filled her with a dread more intense than anything she had felt in bondage. 8 wagons in total rumbled past, and as they rode toward the main road, she caught snatches of their low conversation talk of the northern route arrangements in Louisville and making sure there are no traces left behind. When the wagons vanished into the distance, a second group of men arrived, rougher and far less polished. These men worked with ruthless efficiency, erasing all evidence of the people who had lived there. They ransacked cabins, gathering letters and papers to burn in a great fire behind the main house, loaded personal effects into smaller wagons, and scattered lime across the cabins and yards to destroy any biological remains. Watching from the trees, Rebecca realized this was no frenzy of violence, but a coordinated operation planned long in advance. The men moved as though following orders, knew exactly where to look and what to obliterate, and left nothing that could tie the crime to anyone. Her horror deepened when she saw them return from the fields, carrying bloodied tools and clothing, tossing them into the fire, and the acrid stench that rose on the humid air left no doubt of what had happened. In that moment, Rebecca knew her husband and the others had been slaughtered and buried somewhere in those fields. But the nightmare did not end there. As the afternoon dragged on, Jeremiah Beaumont galloped in from Paris, and from his panicked search, it was clear he knew nothing of what had taken place. His anguish was real, and Rebecca, hidden among the trees, watched as Magistrate Hartwell stepped forward, already holding a prepared explanation, the final piece of a conspiracy designed to erase 41 lives from history. Here's a rewritten version of your text as a single flowing and engaging paragraph, with no line breaks or special characters, keeping all of the important details vivid and easy to follow. Rebecca could not hear every word of the conversation between Hartwell and Jeremiah, but she caught enough to understand that Hartwell was spinning a lie about the workers fleeing in the night after threats from vigilantes, and even produced documents claiming they had violated their contracts. Jeremiah's anguish and desperate protests were met with calm reassurances. But from her hiding place, Rebecca saw the truth, the way Hartwell and the others controlled the exchange with subtle gestures and careful positioning, turning Jeremiah's grief into compliance. As dusk settled over the plantation, she realized the terrible danger she was in and began to slip quietly deeper into the woods, planning to stay hidden until she could escape. That was when she overheard 2 rough-looking men leaning on their shovels, smoking and talking in low voices near the tree line. One complained bitterly about how hard they had worked in the eastern fields, and the other laughed and said with chilling indifference that 41 bodies don't bury themselves, especially when you have to dig deep enough that they'll never be found. But the pay was good, and the job would remind folks to stay in their place. He added that the lime would take care of the rest, and by spring, the ground would be the richest in the county, fertilized by those who had thought themselves above their station. Their casual cruelty confirmed Rebecca's worst fears and told her exactly where her husband and the others had been buried the eastern fields. She waited until after midnight before fleeing through the woods, never daring to return to her cabin, and walked all the way to Lexington, where the excuse of caring for her dying sister covered her absence. In the days that followed, she realized the reach of the conspiracy went far beyond what she had seen. When Sheriff Danvers began his investigation, she considered telling him everything. But two well-dressed men came to her with a clear warning wrapped in polite words. They knew what she had witnessed. They would be watching her, and she would be wise to leave Kentucky. They even handed her money for travel, a silent payment for her silence. Terrified, Rebecca moved to Cincinnati, where she worked as a domestic servant and never spoke of the massacre. Still, she could not forget, and in secret she began writing everything she had seen, drawing maps, listing names, and documenting the events of that terrible day, so that someday the truth would come out. Those records, hidden until her death in 1902, became the legacy she passed on to her family. In 1924, her grandson, Elias Rutledge, finally broke that silence as he told Margaret Beaumont what his grandmother had witnessed. With tears running down his face, he said she had spent her whole life carrying the weight of that day, believing justice would never come. But that now perhaps if the truth was told, the dead could at last find peace. Then he led Margaret to his home and revealed the hidden evidence: Rebecca's letters, lists of names, timelines, and a map marking the exact place where the killers had returned from their grisly work. These documents showed that the Kentucky Brotherhood was not just a local cabal, but part of a regional network of terror, supported by judges, politicians, and businessmen who used fear and violence to maintain their wealth and their grip on a world they refused to let change. Here is a rewritten, more engaging and tightly flowing version of your latest section as one continuous paragraph with no line breaks, keeping the conspiracy stakes and atmosphere intact. The decision to destroy the Beaumont plantation workforce had been made during a secret meeting in Louisville in May of 1876, attended by Brotherhood leaders from across Kentucky and neighboring states who agreed that Jeremiah Beaumont's integrated workforce posed a dangerous threat to their power. If Beaumont succeeded, it would prove that the South could prosper without the racial oppression and exploitative labor that enriched them. From that moment, the massacre was planned with military precision. The timing was chosen to strike at the peak of harvest, ensuring the workers would be reluctant to leave and that their sudden disappearance would cripple the plantation's economy. The remote eastern fields, hidden from the main house and roads, became the perfect killing ground. Rebecca's documents revealed that Beaumont was not the first target. The Brotherhood had orchestrated similar purges throughout the region, eliminating integrated workforces, Republican leaders, civil rights activists, and anyone who threatened the post-Reconstruction order. Their records treated murder and terror as a business strategy, logging meetings' profits and the properties they seized. When Margaret absorbed this evidence, she understood why her search for the truth had been met with threats, interference, and even murder. The descendants of those conspirators still held power, and the Brotherhood's influence had never truly ended. Yet now, for the first time in nearly half a century, there was hope. Rebecca's testimony and meticulously preserved records named names, exposed methods, and pointed to the exact place where the 41 workers lay buried. It was proof that could finally bring justice. But Margaret also knew the danger. The same forces that silenced Rebecca and had Robert Hayes killed would not hesitate to destroy her. Through the bitter winter of 1924 into 1925, she worked in secret to ensure the evidence survived, making multiple copies of Rebecca's documentation and her own research, smuggling them out of Kentucky to trusted contacts. Historical societies in Boston and Chicago, civil rights organizations in New York and Philadelphia, and journalists in cities far beyond the Brotherhood's reach. She knew, however, that simply releasing the evidence would not be enough. The Brotherhood's grip extended into the very courts and law enforcement agencies that were supposed to enforce justice. Margaret's breakthrough came when she made contact with Special Agent Franklin Morrison of the Justice Department in Louisville, one of the few federal investigators still dedicated to pursuing the violent networks that state and local authorities ignored. Morrison had been quietly investigating organized racial terrorism for years. And when Margaret placed Rebecca's evidence in his hands, he realized it documented a criminal enterprise on a scale larger than anything his office had been able to prove. His investigation confirmed that the Kentucky Brotherhood was just one part of a vast Southern network, a more sophisticated successor to the Ku Klux Klan, built on secrecy, blood, and power. The Brotherhood had kept meticulous ledgers treating murder and terror as if they were just another branch of business, planned with the same precision as any commercial enterprise. It took over 2 years for Morrison's federal investigation, working with teams from other states to unravel the organization's structure, membership, and crimes. What they uncovered was staggering: hundreds of murders, thousands of acts of intimidation, and a network of corruption that had poisoned the courts, the sheriff's offices, and the political institutions of the South. Among all these atrocities, the Beaumont massacre emerged as one of the most documented thanks to Rebecca's hidden records and Margaret's persistence, giving prosecutors a case so complete it could no longer be ignored. In 1920s, 26 grand juries in Louisville, Lexington, and Frankfort indicted 47 members of the Kentucky Brotherhood, including judges, county officials, and prominent businessmen, on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to federal civil rights violations. The trials that began in 1927 shocked Kentucky and the nation, as for the first time, the veil was ripped from decades of organized, systemic terror. Hartwell's son Harrison, faced with overwhelming evidence of his father's role, chose to cooperate rather than stand trial. And his testimony confirmed Rebecca's accounts while exposing crimes that had never been investigated. He revealed that the massacre was ordered from Louisville, planned months in advance, as a warning to other integrated operations, and that legal papers justifying the disappearance had been prepared even before the murders. He described the Brotherhood's cold accounting of death, where assassinations and arson were recorded as business expenses, and the slaughter at Beaumont was considered an investment to protect their profits. The trials laid bare how deeply the conspiracy had infiltrated Kentucky's justice system, with judges who dismissed cases, sheriffs who refused to act, and politicians who blocked reform. As the legal proceedings advanced, Margaret joined federal authorities in locating the mass grave in the eastern fields, guided by Rebecca's maps. Excavations confirmed the horror. The 41 victims had been buried in a concealed pit dug deep into the limestone soil. Over days of solemn work, their remains were carefully documented, some identified through personal effects and dental records, and given the dignity of proper burials at last. A memorial service in Paris, Kentucky, honored their lives, and hundreds gathered as families who had waited for decades finally learned what had happened to their kin. A monument bearing the names of the 41 was raised over the cemetery. Speakers called the massacre a lesson on the importance of facing historical injustice. Margaret was publicly honored for her courage, but she insisted the credit belonged to Rebecca Rutledge, whose courage in secret had preserved the truth. By the end of the trials, 31 of the 47 indicted were convicted, receiving sentences from 10 years to life, with the harshest punishments for those who had taken part directly in the murders, while others died before they could be tried or fled into hiding, leaving the stain of their crimes as a permanent scar on Kentucky's history. The Kentucky Brotherhood was shattered as an organization, though some of its surviving members who escaped prosecution continued to hold positions of influence for decades. The exposure of the Beaumont massacre reached far beyond Bourbon County, triggering renewed federal action against organized terrorism in the South and inspiring stronger civil rights legislation. It also prompted similar investigations in other states, uncovering comparable networks of violence and bringing additional conspirators to justice. Margaret Beaumont dedicated the rest of her life to ensuring the 41 victims were never forgotten. She established the Beaumont Memorial Foundation, offering scholarships to the descendants of the murdered workers, funding research into post-Reconstruction violence, and preserving a vast archive of documents, testimonies, and evidence she had gathered. Her collection became one of the most important historical records of its kind, filled not just with facts, but with the personal stories of the victims and the devastation left in their absence. Margaret became a tireless speaker, traveling across the country to tell the story of the Beaumont massacre and its meaning, working with other researchers to document similar crimes so that this history could never again be buried. In time, the old plantation itself was transformed into a memorial and educational center. The restored cabins became exhibits that told the lives of the 41 and placed their struggle in the wider context of post-war labor and race relations. While the eastern fields were turned into a quiet memorial garden marked with walking paths and plaques explaining the events that took place there. The site grew into an important destination for students, historians, and visitors determined to confront the legacy of that terrible night, and to see how its lessons continue to resonate in the ongoing fight for justice and equality. The mission of the Beaumont Memorial Center is not only to honor the 41 victims, but to ensure their sacrifice deepens our understanding of how organized oppression takes root and how it can be resisted. The legacy of the Beaumont massacre reaches far beyond the night of July 23, 1876. Standing as one of the most thoroughly documented cases of post-Reconstruction terrorism and giving historians rare insight into how conspiracy violence and corruption were used to uphold systems of inequality. The records Rebecca Rutledge risked her life to preserve and Margaret Beaumont later uncovered have fueled countless academic studies and exposed similar crimes across the South. But their true power lies in showing how courage can confront institutional evil. Rebecca's determination to document what she saw, and Margaret's relentless pursuit of truth, despite threats and legal barriers, prove that even the most entrenched conspiracies can be brought into the light when individuals refuse to be silent. The case also underscores the necessity of federal protection of civil rights. When local justice is corrupted, for the Kentucky Brotherhood thrived for decades, only because it controlled courts, law enforcement, and politics, until outside intervention broke its power. Today, visitors to the Beaumont Memorial walk through the restored grounds. Visit the Memorial Garden where the names of the 41 are carved in stone and explore archives that hold thousands of pages of evidence. Yet the most powerful part of the site is how it connects the past to the present, reminding us that the fight for equality is not finished, and that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they act with courage. Those 41 workers dreamed of a better future, a world where dignity, opportunity, and fairness were not determined by race or birth. And though violence silenced their voices, their dream survives in the ongoing struggle for justice. What do you think of their story? Was justice truly served, or do the crimes of the Kentucky Brotherhood still cast a shadow on our legal system today? How can we make sure their sacrifice leads to a more just society? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this story as compelling as we did, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves uncovering the hidden truths of history. These stories matter because they show us not just where we have been, but where we are going and how we can build a better future for everyone. See you in the next video as we continue exploring the shadows and light of America's past. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.